Oh, okay. Headache won't go away, but that's life, you know? So, all right, we are gonna go over homework. If you didn't turn it in, and you have it done, turn it in now, otherwise you lost your chance, because we're gonna go over it. There's a lot of material in this chapter, and I don't wanna wait too long to go over exercises that I assigned, because I wanna make sure that we understand what we're doing before we move on. So you had exercises 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 for homework, and those are on page 223. And we'll take one of these at a time. And all right, so exercise 5.1 says, last month when Holiday Creations Inc. sold 50,000 units in sales, variable expenses and fixed expenses were 200,000, 120, and 65 respectively. So it says, what's the company's contribution margin ratio and what is the company's variable expense ratio? So an initial glance, you might think, well, I'm going to do the whole template so that I have the variables. And you can do the whole template. You don't have to do the whole template to figure this out. But we talked about the formulas for each of those. And so it says, what is the company's contribution margin ratio? So first I need to find contribution margin. Do you agree? Yeah? Okay. So if we do this, sales, variable cost, contribution margin, and this is what I get for leaving my good markers in here over the weekend because now they're gone. I won't be able to tolerate this, so I'll be done. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so we've got sales of 50,000 units, right? Sales, variable expenses, fixed expenses were given. So we had sales of 200,000, and variable expenses of 120. So that means we have contribution margin of 80 and 65. Fixed, right? And so here. All right, so we didn't need to do all this, but I'm going to do it because it's helpful, I think. And then we'll just talk about the easy way too, right? The easier way we could have got these. So how do I figure out the per unit values? Yeah, divide by the units sold. So $200,000 divided by 50,000 units. And I don't really need that for this, but I'm going to put it up here anyway. What do we get? $4? Okay. And then variable cost, 120,000 divided by 50,000 units is what? 240. Okay, so this would be $1.60. Everybody understand where I got those per unit values? Okay, just in case. And then our ratio or our percentage is this last column. We know that we start off with 100%, right? So the questions are, what is the company's contribution margin ratio? So that's this number here, right? Which I don't know yet. And then the second one, what is the company's variable expense ratio? Which is what this is here. So that's what we're solving for, right? Okay. A couple of ways I can figure it out. Somebody give me one way that I can figure out the contribution margin ratio. Say that again?
120,000 divided by 200,000.
This one?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yep, okay. I don't know if you saw where I pointed, but yeah. So 80 divided by, and the only reason I did that one first is because the first question asks for what is contribution margin ratio, right? So, yeah, 80 divided by 200, or, yeah, $1.60 divided by $4. You get the same answer either way? Yeah, what is it? 40%. 40%, okay. Yeah. Eraser. And for this one here, right, I know that 100 minus 40 is 60. So I don't really have to do a whole lot here, but because we want to make sure we understand how all these formulas come into play, what's my formula for this one? So we can do, yeah, let's keep it consistent. We can do $2.40 divided by $4. I can use the per unit values, or I can use totals. Now, if you knew those formulas and they were in your PowerPoints, you did not have to go to all the trouble of filling out the entire template. But again, the template provides us everything that we need to answer any questions. Questions on that first one? Okay, so the second one, we have several questions pertaining to this one. It says, so the title of this one is the effect of changes in unit sales on net operating income. And I think I'm just going to show this to you guys on my paper here, because it saved me a little time from writing on the board. But it says Worley Corporation's contribution format income statement for the most recent month is shown below. So we've got 10,000 units sold, and they put theirs next to sales. I always write mine up by the total there. Either way is fine, just as long as you know that number, right? So the total there is 350,000. So per unit value is 35, which makes sense because $350 divided by 10,000 units is $35 per unit, right? Okay. And then the variable expenses are $200,000 in total divided by 10,000 units would be $20 per unit. So remember, sales, variable costs, and contribution margin all move in the same direction, right? Well, I'm sorry, sales and variable costs move in the same direction, but they're all variable, right? Because they all depend on the number of units. So 35 minus 20 is 15, right? And 350 minus 200 is 150. But 150,000 divided by 10,000 units is also $1.50. So the math works in all directions there, right? And then we have fixed expenses of 135,000 to give net operating income of 15,000. Okay, so consider each case independently. And remember, this is kind of our starting point. I like to call it what-if analysis. If you had an Excel course, you can do what-if analysis using Excel. And you're just trying to kind of figure out, well, what happens if I change this? What happens if I sell more? And again, that's the whole point of cost, volume, profit analysis, right? To understand the relationship between those variables. When one changes, how does that affect the others? So in the first scenario, it says, what would be the revised net operating income per month if the sales volume increases by 100 units? So tell me how many units you'd be selling now. 10,100. I hope more than one person knew that. So 10,100, right? And basically, and again, I always write my units up here, doesn't matter. You had to recalculate sales, variable expenses, and contribution margin. Your per unit values did not change. The problem just said you sold 100 more units. So now you recalculate your totals, right? Assuming that you sold 10,100 units instead of 10,000 units. So 10,100 times $35 is 353,500. 10,100 units times $20 is 202,000. Obviously, contribution margin is going to change as well, and it does change in the same direction there. But what doesn't change in this problem? Fixed expenses. There's no mention of fixed expenses. Now, I need to make sure that you're clear on something. The reason that these totals changed was not because the per unit values changed. They stayed the same, right? the level of activity is what changed, right? You went from 10,000 units to 10,100, okay? Fixed costs can change, but the reason that they change is not because of changes in levels of activity. So the 10,100 has no bearing on these fixed expenses. Let's say, for example, rent. We typically consider rent a fixed expense. And let's say that you sign a lease and you live in an apartment for 2 years and your rent's $800 a month. Does that mean that your rent will never or can never go up? Probably at the end of your lease term, just like everything else, your rent's probably going up for the next year or 2-year lease period or whatever you're signing for. So it becomes a new fixed amount for the next 12 months, right? So it's not that your fixed expenses can't change, it's just they're not going to change because you sold more or less. Your sales and your variable expenses will change because you sold more or less, but not your fixed expenses. They're not based on level of activity. Does that make sense? So it isn't that we can't have a change in fixed expenses, okay? So your new net operating income is $16,500, which is how much more than previous? 1,500, okay? The reason I ask that is because there was a shortcut to getting that answer. Bless you. Anybody want to tell me what that shortcut was?
You take the 100 units by the $15 of the contribution margin.
Yep. Yep, if you take, look, here's the shortcut. And this is why I say it's important to understand what these values mean up here. Remember how I circled these and I wrote out an explanation for each of them, right? So if you truly understand what contribution margin per unit is, for every additional unit sold, you get $15 that goes towards your income, right? So you had another 100 units times 15, and here it is, right? Right here is another $1,500. So your previous income was 15,000. You're gonna get another 1,500, so that's 16,500. This obviously is much shorter than that way. Either way is acceptable, but I like to show you both ways so that you can kind of in your brain, hopefully that makes sense to you. Some students will say, well, I'm just not comfortable with that shortcut. Like I'd prefer to do the math and lay it out, and that makes better sense to me, and that's okay. But you can say to yourself, hey, that contribution margin represents an extra $15 per unit. So if you have another 100 units, you get an extra 1,500 bucks. Make sense? Questions? Okay, so let's see, part 2 of that question. What would be the revised net operating income per month if the sales volume decreases by 100 units? So what does the new sales volume become? You go back to the original 10,000, now you're down to what? 9,900, and we have a similar situation here, right? So 9,900 is 100 units less. So 9,900 times $35 per unit. The per unit didn't change, right? It's just the level of activity changed. But that means your total sales are going to drop. You sold less units, so you're going to have less total sales. And because you sold less units, you're going to have less variable expenses associated with those, right? So $20 times 9,900 is where you get 198,000. Make sure you know where I'm getting all my numbers. If you don't, please ask, because you need to know how to do these. So then your contribution margin is also going to fall. And again, 15 times 9,900. Fixed expenses don't change. Doesn't mean they can't, just in this problem they weren't changing. So net operating income is now 13,500, which is a decrease, right, from the original of 15,000 down to 1,500. So the shortcut for that one, instead of adding another $1,500, you would have subtracted, right? Minus 100 units at $15. So you're losing contribution margin if you're selling less units than where you originally started from. So this is perfectly acceptable. This is just a little shortcut, right? You sell 100 units more, it's an extra 1,500. You sell 100 units less, that's 100, or that's 1,500 less than what you were previously making. Make sense? Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. So the last one, it says, what would be the revised net operating income if the sales volume was 9,000? What'd you get? 0. That is correct. And what do we call that? We're going to learn about that today, actually. That's break even. Yeah, so this is the company's break even point. So you could have done it. I don't know why the shortcut's not on here. This one, it's just not. So you got 1,000, minus 1,000 units, right? Times $15 is minus 15,000. And so you started off with 150,000 of income minus 15, you're down to 135. So this is what we refer to as our break even. So the company needs to sell 9,000 units to break even. Break even means no income or loss, right? And we talked a little bit about, I think we did on Friday anyway, why break even is so important. Why is break even so important to a business owner? Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, you've paid all your bills, right? And everything after that is, yeah, pure profit, right? So every dollar that you sell after that is pure profit. And so it'd be nice to have an idea throughout the month of what that number actually is, right? So you can kind of plan. Okay, any questions on exercise 5.3? All right, I'm sorry, that was 5.2, not 5.3. We're gonna do 5.3 right now. And 5.3 is at the bottom of the page. There we go. Engbird Company installs lawn sod in home yards. The company's most recent monthly contribution format income statement follows. So they give us the totals and the percentages, and we don't really need the per unit values here, do we, for this question? So I'm not going to go ahead and do that. We don't need it. The question is, what is the company's degree of operating leverage? So someone tell me how we find that. Someone that did the assignment. Contribution margin divided by net operating income. So for that one, we've got 48,000 divided by 10,000, and our answer is 4.8 what? Yeah, times. Be careful. So I heard somebody say percent, and if you want to call it a percent, what is 4.8 as a percentage? Yep. All right. I just think you should stick to this, because if you start using this, then when you're multiplying by other things that aren't that aren't in the same format, you can kind of get things can get a little crazy. So there's some zeros and decimal places. So let's just say it's times, right? It's the number of times by which your net operating income will increase for every 1% increase in sales. So it says, number 2, using the degree of operating leverage, estimate the impact on net operating income of a 5% increase in unit sales. So if unit sales go up 5%, then net operating income should go up 4.8 times that, which is what? 24%. Right? Everybody get that? That might sound like a lot, right? So for every 1% increase in sales, net operating income is going to go up 24%. And then it says, verify your estimate from part 2 above by constructing a new contribution format income statement for the company, assuming a 5% increase in unit sales. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to show you the solution here. Tell me the variables that all go up by 5% because your unit sales increased by 5%. Sales, variable cost, contribution margin. And fixed expenses will do what? Stay the same, because there's no mention of those increasing for any particular reason. So here's what we got. So remember, our net operating income was 10,000. Keep that in mind, okay? And here we go. This is our new income statement. How do we get those numbers? Well, the easiest way to do that, what was the original amount of sales? 80,000, right? Yes? Just so, for example, I'm going to show this to you, sales. So you can do this the long way, or you can do this the short way. So 80,000, and it says a 5% increase, right? So 80,000 times 5%, which I prefer decimals, but so I'll write it both that way, right? Either or, is an extra $4,000, correct? Yeah, and then what you did was you took 80,000 plus 4,000 and you got 4,000, right? So this 80,000 right here, right, is 80,000 times itself. or 100%. Because a decimal, 100% is 1.00 plus another 5%, which is the 4,000, right? I can, just like I'm adding here, I can combine those. So 1 plus 0.05 is 1.05, and that just gives me 84,000. So it's automatically, the extra 4,000 gets automatically added back in without the second step, right? So keep that in mind, right? Because this 84,000 is 1 plus another 0.05 added back to itself. So 1.05 times 80,000 gives me 84,000. Does that make sense? Just a little shortcut, little business math shortcut there. So do the same for variable expenses. Originally, variable expenses were 32,000. So 32,000 times 1.05 is going to give you 33,600. Now, you could do the same with contribution margin. You didn't have to, though. You could have just said 84,000 minus 33,600 is 50,400. Fixed expenses remained at 38,000, so net operating income is 12,400. So how do I know that it went up? We said 24%. So did I show you guys the percentage change? We talk about the percentage change, right? So the percentage change in anything is equal to, and I'll put it this way, new minus old over old. You can say that a lot of different ways, right? The new net income is 12,400. The old was 10,000, right? The old is 10,000. So basically you're taking the change, which the difference is 2,400. So 2,400 divided by 10,000 is 24%. So all we did was we proved that when our sales go up 5%, our net operating income goes up by 24%. Okay. You with me? All right, any questions on those things? Because we are going to move on to some more formulas today. If you were here on Friday, what did I tell you about formulas that you want to know and remember? That you are or you're not going to have to memorize them.
No.
You're not going to have to memorize them. I am going to give you a formula sheet on the exam. I'll give it to you for the review so that you're kind of comfortable with it before I hand it to you for the exam. But I do not make you memorize all these formulas. Now, some of them you'll say, well, they're pretty easy. I'm going to remember them anyway, and that's fine. But what I don't want you focusing on is the formula, memorizing the formula, and losing sight of what the formula tells us, what the outcome, how to interpret the outcome, which is, to me, probably the most important part. I know that if I give you formulas, you guys can plug numbers into the formulas into your calculator and get the answer. That I am confident of. But can you tell me what it means? That's what our focus is going to be. All right. We already talked a little bit about break-even analysis, right? And we're back to RBC, and here's this. This is exactly what I put up on the board a couple of days ago, sort of like as our template for racing bicycle. And so the next thing we're going to calculate is break-even. We've already talked a little bit about what break-even means, what it represents. And it represents the amount of either units that you have to sell to break even, or the amount of sales dollars that you have to earn in order to break even, right? All right, so some formulas here. Now you guys have PowerPoints. I gave them to you. Everybody has a copy of them, right? So a couple of things. If you have a textbook and you happen to look at it by any chance, there are additional alternatives to finding break even and all of the other ratios that we're using. And when I say alternative, you'll notice at the top it says formula method. There is something called the equation method, which basically is just like an algebraic equation, but I stay away from it in class. I don't share it up here as an alternative, but it is in your book. And the reason I don't is because I just feel like students get afraid of the algebra, the word algebra, and solving for things that way. So I don't want to scare anyone any more than I might already do, and so we just stick with the formulas because they're just kind of easy to use. All right. So the formula for break even. There are going to be two ways to express break even. You can see the formula up here. We take our fixed expenses and we divide by unit contribution margin. So I want to write this up here real quick so it's here. And remember, totals per units and ratios, right? So I mentioned that the word ratio means what? I told you guys this last week. Who remembers? What is it describing between numbers? A relationship. Yes, thank you. It describes a relationship between numbers. So what we're looking for is what is the relationship between unit contribution margin and fixed expenses, right? So they plugged in the numbers from Racing Bicycle. So if I would go to the slide before, the fixed expenses for Racing Bicycle were $80,000 and the unit contribution margin was $200. And we said unit contribution margin means for every unit sold, $200 goes towards covering your fixed expenses. And then if there's anything left over, profit. So look at the relationship here. Unit CM literally is what I use to cover my fixed expenses, isn't it? And all you have to do is look at my little formula up here, guys. Look, this, right, is covering these. And if there's any left over, it's this, right? If your contribution margin is equal to your fixed costs, then you break even. Your net operating income is 0. So this is describing how many units we need to sell in order to achieve a net operating income of 0. So if I were to go and take 400 units times 500 for my sales times 300 for my variable costs and plug all that in and redo my financial statement, my net operating income should be 0. And you guys have that in your PowerPoints. That's already in there. The other way to express break even is in sales dollars. You'll notice that instead of dividing by unit CM, so if I want to know how many units I need to sell, I divide by unit CM. If I want to know how much sales dollars I need, I divide by the contribution margin ratio. And again, if you go back to the way I described unit CM and CM ratio, like the explanation that I gave you, for every $1 of sales, 40 cents of that dollar goes to cover fixed costs. That's what the 40% represents. So these numbers, again, just came from the template for Racing Bicycle. Fixed costs are $80,000, CM ratio is 40%. So CM ratio also covering your fixed cost. There we go. So you got to sell $200 worth of bikes just to break even. And again, I won't, it's like I'm beating a dead horse up here. I won't go back into why is it so important to know those numbers. If you were the owner of Racing Bicycle, you'd probably understand what your magic numbers were, right? You hit those minimums and you're like, I paid my bills for the month, right? Which is good. That's obviously what you want to try to do. All right, so you guys remember Coffee Klatch? You have your Coffee Klatch template. Hello, yes, baby? We did it together the other day. You guys want to give me the numbers? I'll see how much I can remember here, but. And still dead silence out there. Sales were $31.29, yes? What was variable cost?
$756.
$756. Okay. Contribution margin then?
$23.70.
Yep. 1,300, right? Okay. And then this was 1,000. And a cup of coffee was $1.49.
Yeah.
And 36. Okay, because this was 113. There we go. 24.2.
Yeah.
And 75. There we go. Okay, doing the quick math. There we go. All right. So we did that together the other day. All of this data in this paragraph, we already went through it. You weren't here the other day. Hopefully you watched the lecture, and if you didn't, then you're missing out. So the question is, I said, if you do this template, you're going to be able to answer any of these questions. The last sentence is all we need here because we already been through all this other stuff. What is the break-even sales dollars? So here's my formula. Here's how I like to write this, break even, because I like to abbreviate, sales dollars, right, is equal to fixed costs divided by CM ratio. And if you just pull the numbers right out of the template, fixed costs are what? 1,300. CM ratio was 75.8%, right? So, and again, I like decimals, so I usually convert everything to a decimal. Okay, what's our answer up there? Yeah, so Coffee Clutch, they got to sell $1,715 worth of coffee just to break even, right? Questions? How about cups? How many cups of coffee? Because remember, that's what our units are in this example. So break even in units. The only thing we're changing is the denominator, because now we want to know how many units we need to sell to cover fixed costs. So what's my unit CM? $1.13. Right. So I have a little issue with this one. And if you do the math, and I know our only option up here is what? If you round, the only option, so you get 1150 point what? 44. Can you have 1150.44 cups of coffee? I mean, I don't know, if somebody sold me like a little less than a half a cup of coffee, I'd be ticked off, right, if I paid for a full cup. So what should this be? I got to round up to the nearest whole what? Cup. Yeah, see, I disagree with I think that should be 1151.
How could you round up though and play some detail with that? Like you have to sell the cup of coffee that has the cup, right?
This is telling me how many cups I have to sell to break even. If I only sell 1150, I'm short a half a cup of coffee that I didn't sell yet.
Okay.
So I'd have to sell another whole cup, right? I can't have a half a cup of coffee. Like I gotta round this to the nearest, I gotta round up to the nearest whole cup.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, and someone might argue, well, okay, 0.44 of a cup, you're gonna be, you're gonna be some change. Well, I might be some change, but I still didn't break even, right? I still need to sell another half a cup of coffee just to break even. And I don't sell my coffee by the half cup, so I gotta round up to the next whole cup. So the better answer would be, the better option would be 1151. Make sense? Okay. All right, so now what else would we like to do? No, I don't like this. Let me see something here. I'm gonna jump ahead to a formula, and then I'm gonna come back to the one I skipped, because I don't like the order that those are in. So we're going to talk about, the next thing we'll talk about is target profit. And the reason that I like to talk about target profit next, because it just makes more sense to me. Can you guys look up here? What two things does my contribution margin contribute to? Fixed costs and operating income, right? I mean, isn't this how this gets divided up between those two things, correct? If these two things are identical, then net operating income is zero, but we'd like to make some money. Would you agree? So ideally, listen carefully, ideally what I want is I want my contribution margin to cover my fixed costs and give me some profit. And most companies have what they call a target profit, how much money they'd like to make in a year. Make sense? So if we modify this formula only slightly, we can figure out how many units we need to sell to achieve a target profit, and I'll call that TP for target profit for short. And all I got to do is include it in the numerator, because look, my contribution margin now has to cover both, right? My target profit when I break even, my target profit was zero, right? Now, I just have to cover both my fixed costs and my target profit. So now what I wanna know, how many units do I need to sell to achieve a target profit? How many sales dollars do I need to earn in order to achieve a target profit? So it doesn't matter which you list first in the numerator either. You've got unit sales to attain a target profit. Yeah, you wanna cover your fixed costs, but you'd like to also make some money. And that's what we mean by target profit. What is that profit I'm looking at? Most companies decide that prior to, their period, they budget, this is how much money I anticipate, so much money, my goal is to make this much money. So how much do I have to sell if I wanna make this much money? That's pretty much what these two formulas tell us, okay? So target profit, fixed expenses divided by contribution margin per unit. Because again, look, my contribution margin, the relationship is it's covering these two items. Contribution margin is covering the things in the numerator. That's the relationship between them. So we got RBC would like to earn a profit of $100,000. So how many bikes do they need to sell? Well, we just add it to the numerator, including the fixed expenses. So you go back to the template again, and you're probably remembering by now, that RBC's fixed costs were $80,000. Also want contribution margin to cover another $100,000 of profit. So now our numerator is 180 divided by unit contribution margin of $200 means you got to sell 900 bicycles, right? 400 break even, but 900 give you a profit of $100,000. Make sense? Okay. And then we have the sales, also target profit in terms of sales. All I change is my denominator. Instead of expressing my instead of expressing my target profit as how many units do I have to sell, how much sales dollars do I need? So divide by contribution margin ratio, which also goes to cover fixed costs and profit, and it's just 180,000 divided by 40%, gives you $450,000 of sales. Questions? All right, give me a sec here. All right, so here we go. We're back to coffee clutch. And I'm just going to read the last sentence. Look, how many cups of coffee would Coffee Clutch have to sell to attain a target profit of $2,500 in a month? Look, you got it all right up here. You can just tell me. Target profit, $2,500. Someone give me my numerator formula. 1,300 plus 2,500. Yeah, 1,300 my fixed cost. 2,500 is my target profit. Divide by unit CM, which is what? $1.13. So how many cups of coffee do they need to sell? You guys have calculators, I hope? I don't remember. How's the math work out for this one? Because my break even was off about half a cup. Oh, so it is 6.2 decimal, 8.3, and then they rounded up. See, they didn't do that with the last one. Somebody didn't do a very good job of checking the work of the textbook author, I guess. 33.63. Got to round to the nearest, up to the nearest whole cup. Questions? Okay. How about sales dollars? Numerator stays the same. What am I dividing by this time? 75.8%. So how much coffee do you got to sell? 5,013. Yep. Sounds like a lot of coffee, huh? I think they need to raise their prices a little bit, $1.41. Any questions on that one? All right, so one more formula, and then we're we're done with the formulas for the most part. I don't know why this order is like this, but it's bothering me. Anyway, the next thing we'll talk about is margin of safety. Okay, margin of safety. So, the margin of safety, listen carefully, is you gotta take what you're currently selling, and compare it to your break even. So before you can do margin of safety, you gotta do break even first. You see that number, right? I know why margin of safety came right after break even, but you need to do break even before you can consider margin of safety. So margin of safety kind of gives you what your leeway is between what you're currently selling and your break even. So for example, if your break even is $20,000 of sales and you're currently selling $25,000, your margin of safety is $5,000. It's simply the difference between what you're currently selling and what your break-even sales are. It's just the amount by which your sales could drop and you could still pay your bills. I could still cover all, even if my sales are 25, they could drop to 20, I'd still be able to pay all my bills. So it gives you that little bit of range. I call it a safety net. So that's kind of why they call it margin of safety, right? Margin means extra, right? So it's a little bit of extra over your break even that you could lose and still cover your bills. So there's three ways of basically expressing margin of safety. And we'll talk about all of them here. So very simply, margin of safety in total sales dollars, right, is simply equal to total sales, and that can be current or budgeted sales. So that's either current sales, or it can be, if you're trying to project, it could be a budgeted amount. Budget. There we go. Minus break-even sales. And that's dollars. So that gives you your margin of safety. Margin of safety in dollars. You do the same thing with units. Margin of safety in units. Very similar, I'm just going to change all the dollars to units. You've got your total sales in units. And that can be current or budgeted units, minus your break-even units, and you get margin of safety units. And lastly, margin of safety as a percentage. And I know some of these are on the slides that follow, but I'm putting them all up here together. Margin of safety as a percentage. You need to do one of these first before you can find your margin of safety as a percentage, okay? And here's what you're going to do. You're going to take your margin of safety, and it can either be units or dollars. Doesn't matter which one. Margin of safety, units or dollars. So whichever one of these you might have done, divided by your sales. But your sales have to also be expressed in the same units as your margin of safety was. So you're dividing by sales in units or dollars. So margin of safety, numerator units, then denominator must be units too. The margin of safety in the numerator is dollars, then the sales must be dollars also. That makes sense, right? You got to stick with, right? You got to be the same, okay? So back to RBC, guys. Look, here's what our template was originally: $250,000 of sales, 500 bikes. We figured out break even. Break even was $200,000 in sales and 400 bikes, or 400 bikes. So my margin of safety in units is simply 500 minus 400, so it's 100, right? RBC could sell 100 fewer bikes and still pay their bills. Make sense? Sales could go from 250 to 200, and they could still pay their bills, okay? As far as the percentage, you can do 100 divided by 500, or you could do 50 divided by 200, and your margin of safety would still be the same percentage, and that would be 20%, okay? Either way. Questions? Okay, you guys ready to get started on some more graded problems for you guys? Page 224, listen carefully. We got to keep busy. We got to keep practicing these so you don't forget how to utilize these formulas. Page 224, you can see it up here. Exercise 5.4, break-even analysis. You must answer all 3 questions. These are going to be due on Wednesday, and we again will go over them at the beginning of class. So, break-even, exercise 5.4. Exercise 5.5, margin of safety. Answer both requirements. And exercise 5.6 is target profit, and you will answer both of those requirements as well. So 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6. You have like 5 or 6 minutes. You guys could probably get at least one of those done in the time remaining. Use your time wisely. Plus I'm here to walk around and see what you're doing. 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6. There's no link in Canvas yet. There will be. That is due Wednesday at the beginning of class, and I will go over that.
You said 5.4, 5.5, that's it?
5.4, 5.5, 5.6. They each line up with the 3 things we covered today. Yep. The break even, target profit, and margin of safety. They work together. Remember, got to have this in by the beginning of class time on Wednesday or it does not count. I'm going over these pretty quickly. Remember, folks, so next week is midterm. Well, yeah, technically it's midterm. I don't know how, I'm supposed to put midterm grades in, but I guess it'll depend on when the system is back up and running. My point in telling you that is that it is at midterm when I convert the first 7 weeks of homework into points. So do not be shocked when you see that grade appear at the end of next week. It probably won't be till the week after because I don't know that I'll get it in before I am going out of town for a couple days. But anyway, just preparing you to see that on there. So far, you're just getting green check marks for things, but they will get converted to points.
How many points is you usually able to expect?
It depends. I usually try to do 100 points at midterm, 100 points at the end of the
Mine's
semester.
still.
Doesn't always work out that way, but there'll definitely be 100 points by midterm for this class. Which is why I stress how important doing the homework is, because that's an easy 100 points if you do the homework and you make an effort. You guys still can't seem to get the rows. You can't seem to get the
I
rows.
messed it up there.
Did you mess it up?
I thought I said that last semester.
No, it's confusing, I know, and everything's still moved back, so. Yeah, okay, so I erased the formula, so the last formulas I put up here, so that's, no, I'm saying target profit. Okay, so you might have to do a little work to find the variables that you need though. remember, folks, you always have to start with the variables in the template before you can start plugging into formulas, so make sure you have the right variables.